All right, so we're going to cover the transgender people in the military issue. This will be fun. Now, I'm only doing this from my phone because I can't be fucked to get back up, go to my computer, and record this all through Sony. I'm just going to give you guys the Viper Unscripted take on why I don't think there should be transgender people serving in the military. It's a two-pronged issue, it's a two-pronged argument, but I'll make it quick. On one hand, if you want them to go into combat roles, you are asking for people who are either biologically women trying to emulate the appearances and traits of a biological male, or biological males attempting to emulate the appearances, traits, otherwise, of a biological female. This, if taken in conjunction with the United States Marine Corps study on women in combat, which demonstrated that women were not as suitable for combat roles as men. Don't like it? I'll put the link down in the description. I'm sure I can find it in the next 5 minutes. That's just too bad. Women are less lethal. They're less effective at crew-served weapons. They get injured at 6 times the rate of their male counterparts. They have less anaerobic and aerobic endurance. They have less anaerobic power capacity. All of these things go together to create a soldier who is simply subpar compared to their counterparts. And when it comes down to combat roles, subpar combatants are not acceptable. If you can prevent having people that are a detriment otherwise to the combat group, you prevent it. You do not allow these people to take up positions in the line unless you absolutely have to. It's one thing to say, okay, well, you know what, we've been overrun, so the cook's going to have to pick up a pistol. All right, that's one thing. But to knowingly handicap oneself by putting in soldiers who are just simply not as well suited to the job individually, and who are a detriment to group cohesion and overall group performance when put into a squad or any other sort of group unit, that is unacceptable. Lives are on the line. This is not a time for feelings. This is not a time for fair. This is a time for winning at whatever the cost may be. And if the cost of keeping more soldiers alive and victorious happens to be the expense of your feelings, I do not care. If you have a problem with the fact that men attempting to restrict and limit their male traits in favor of feminine traits, all right, and me saying that makes them less qualified as a soldier when the USMC has already qualified the fact that women are less effective as soldiers than men, I don't care. The facts are there. You can check them out yourself. Oh, but what if a woman's transitioning into a man? What if somebody who's biologically female wants to transition to being a man? They're taking testosterone. Doesn't that even the playing field? No. Anaerobic power, musculoskeletal structure, all of these things which will have, by majority, developed to their end point by the time these people are joining the military and coming out into combat. I'm sorry, you're still not going to be able to change everything about yourself to the point where you are now as combat capable as a man, much less factoring in the issue of group cohesion and the kind of dynamic shift that creates. So I'm just not going to go any further on that one. If you got concerns, if you've got criticisms of that point, throw them in the comments. But again, if women aren't as qualified to be soldiers as men, then I'm sorry. Men who are restricting their male traits and women trying to emulate male traits just aren't going to fly with me in combat. Now, what about non-combat roles? Well, with non-combat roles, we come into the issue of, well, in many of the services, women weren't allowed to be in combat for a very long time, and the USMC still excludes them. Well, they're still in these services, they're just not in combat roles, so why can't transgender people be there? Well, that one's pretty simple. That one comes down to cost. It comes down to a lot of other wishy-washy arguments that are more personal than practical. But if they're going to be doing the same non-combat roles and they're going to be costing the military more, all right, whether it's a trans man, so, born a woman, transitioning into a male, that is going to, want their HRT or their transitional surgeries, that sort of thing, paid for by the military. I'm sorry, that shit happens to be expensive. And so if the military can cut costs knowing they're not going to have to pay this extra amount for surgeries, hormone replacement, counseling, again, looking at the fact that transgender people have a much higher rate of other mental health issues going along, parallel to their dysphoria. If you can say, well, we're not going to hire these people because they're going to be a guaranteed extra cost versus people who are otherwise not of this particular identifiable group, I'm sorry, it's a government project. It's keeping the costs down to maintain the same outcome. It's that simple. It's a whole lot of cost added in for a transgender person to serve in the military and get a whole bunch of benefits that they want to cover, things that do not have to be covered for the vast majority of people going. And finally, let's just remember this one little tidbit. People who are transgender make up a nearly insignificant percentage of the population. Less than 1%. This is not saying that these individual people are insignificant. This is saying that we should not be making this giant fuss or having this big issue over this small of a population. Because not even all of this population wants to serve in the military. So you slash that even further. What fraction of the population is transgender and wants to serve in the military and could pass all the physical testing and the rest of it? How many? Are you willing to sacrifice group cohesion in combat or to pay all this extra money in benefits because some fraction of the population wants to feel like they're included? You want to feel included? Go work at an office job. Go work in retail. Go work somewhere where lives aren't on the line and where efficiency doesn't have to be absolutely paramount. Go there. When it comes to the military, there are certain standards, and they are not just individual standards. That's the argument I think that bothers me the most right now. Well, if an individual person can pass the tests, I don't give a fuck. Don't care. 0 fucks given. Because they then have to operate as part of a group. That group then needs to be as efficient as possible. And if the traits of that person, and I'm sorry if you're just born with it, that's just too bad. Somebody born without a fucking arm is going to be less effective in a role. And they're going to affect group cohesion as well. If things you are born with happen to make it so that you are not as suitable, all right, and that your addition is not conducive or as conducive to group cohesion, then you're not getting in. You don't have to be there. This has been a Viper Unscripted rant. I'm sure there will be plenty of people who take issue with this, and that's perfectly fine. I'm ranting this off at 2 a.m. I will refine this tomorrow. But let it be stated that no, I don't think that we should have transgender people in the military. And as an added kicker, I don't think we should have women in combat. Good night, folks.